these two ahadith or three ahadith. Firstly, are they two ahadith or three? Three. The first one says إذا ولغ الكلب في الإناء أحدكم فاغسلوه 7 مرات. طيب. فاغسلوه 7. It doesn't mention anything about adding soil or things like that. And that's the position of Malik rahimahullah. Jazakallah. طيب. What's the second hadith? Hey, good. Narrated by who? Muslim. So this counts as a separate hadith in reality. It really, in reality, it counts as a separate hadith. Because even though it seems like it's just another wording, sometimes an extra word contains extra meaning. And that extra meaning is basically an extra hadith. And this is what set apart the early scholars from later scholars. Early scholars had comprehensive, encompassing knowledge of hadith. And so, even though it seems like they're repeating a hadith with different chains of narration, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, in reality, each hadith, not always, but a lot of the time, contains new meaning, extra benefit. And Ali ibn al-Madini, the great Imam of the Muhaddithin in his time, says, الباب إذا لم تجمع طرقه لم يتبين خطأه. If you do not compile and collect the hadith, the different narrations of a hadith, you will not be able to spot any mistakes or errors or issues. And that's the best way to clarify the meaning of a hadith. It's to collect its narrations. It's to collect its narrations and to see what kinds of differences there are between them. And in a minute, we're going to talk about a different narration which gives us a new understanding about that hadith, inshallah. طيب, so that's the second hadith in Sahih Muslim. The third hadith is narrated by a different companion altogether. So that's obviously a different hadith. And it's also worded slightly differently. طيب. Most of the ulama take from this hadith that the saliva of a dog is najis. Ulama have differed so much on this issue of impurity. What exactly constitutes impurity? And it's quite a tricky area. A lot of people think that anything that's disgusting or not nice is impure. And that's not necessarily true. Okay, what are some things that are pure even though they're not pleasant? Mud, for example, or many. طيب, with some difference of opinion on many, on semen, but possibly according to some ulama. And what about things that are clearly tahir according to the consensus of ulama? Dust. Dust. Okay, yeah, it's tahir. Sweat, saliva. Yeah, these things they're not pleasant. Okay. But that doesn't mean that they are najis, impure. At the same time, some things could be impure, some things could be impure, and at the same time, less pleasant than some things that are, or more pleasant than some things that are. So the issue of purity can sometimes be a tricky one. That's especially tricky when it comes to animals. And that's why ulama have differed on it in an unbelievable way. On the one side, you have some ulama who say every single animal is najis, impure, unless it's halal to eat that animal, in which case it's pure. And that's basically the view of the Hanabila and some of the, maybe the Shafi'iyya and others, in summary, with some details. And on the opposite side, we have the view of Malik, who says every single animal is tahir, including dogs and pigs. Okay, every single animal is pure, including dogs and pigs. Because he distinguishes between, is it permissible to eat or impermissible, and is it pure? Obviously, Malik believes it's haram to eat pork, for sure. Yeah, that's the Quran, that we don't need, it's not the view of Malik. It's the Quran, and the explicit Sunnah is undisputed on that. But he doesn't see a correlation between that and purity. And that's why, according to Malik, you have to wash the saliva of a dog 7 times only because the Prophet ﷺ commanded it, not because it's najis. And his idea and his reasoning is that the fact that the Prophet ﷺ stipulated a specific number, 7, means that this is more like an act of worship than it is washing something that's impure. Whereas most of the ulama say no, increase in washes is because of the possible severity of the harm. So for Malik, maybe washing the dog's saliva is because it's a possible harmful thing, not because it's najis. Okay? None of us would eat, what's the word? What's sum? I've forgotten the word in English.
Poison.
None of us would eat poison. None of us would eat poison. And yet that doesn't necessarily make it najis. In fact, it would be haram to eat it or consume it. And it doesn't make it najis. So Malik takes that kind of position. But most of the ulama, at least from the 3 madhahib, Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa and Ahmad, believe that dog saliva is najis and therefore must be washed. Whether a dog licks your clothes or the table or chair, or whether he drinks from a container, for them it's all the same because it's najis. And according to Malik, if a dog licks you on the street, you don't have to clean that because the Prophet ﷺ specified containers. Yeah, it's as though containers should be washed only because people may use it to eat and drink, so it should be washed because of that. But as for impurity, according to the position of Malik rahimahullah, he has no problem. He says Allah Ta'ala in the Quran allows us to use dogs for hunting, and he says, فَكُلُوا مِمَّا أَمْسَكْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ, eat what they catch. And he didn't talk about washing or cleansing or anything like that. So that's the view of Malik, and that's a position that can be taken, times of, maybe awkwardness or hardship, especially if someone is, I gave this answer, for example, to somebody who, accepted Islam and still living with his parents, and they have a dog or so in the house. So I said, am I allowed to live in the same house and this and that? And what about purification and washing my clothes every time I pray? And I said, khalas, in that case, you take up the position of Malik on this issue and resolve this issue altogether. So that's the debate on that issue. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah. The reason Malik rahimahullah didn't take with the narration of soil is because Malik himself narrates this hadith without that addition. So the way he narrates it, the way he heard the hadith, is without that addition. So it seems like he wasn't convinced with, that being a sound narration. But, most of the muhaddithin authenticate that narration, yeah.
Could another point be added to Malik's side, that maybe the Prophet prevented or ordered the washing of the utensils because of any disease?
Possibly.
Disease from the dogs?
Possibly, it could well be. It could well be. The issue of disease or bacteria or something doesn't contradict either opinion. Something could be harmful because both sides still believe you should wash and cleanse the container. But that's a possible reason as well. According to Imam Ahmad, according to the Hanbali madhab at least, and the famous opinion of the Shafi'is is contrary to this. According to Imam Ahmad, soil is used as an extra means of cleansing, as something that was maybe more widely available at the time. And that's why the Hanabila don't have a problem with replacing soil with soap or something along those lines. And that's one opinion in the Shafi'i school as well. So obviously for a lot of people that's a lot more convenient, if faced with that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, just going to ask if soil is a
Yeah.
means of the
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. طيب, so that's that hadith. He says after that, the following hadith, And now we come to the description of wudu. He says, عن حمران مولى عثمان ابن عفان رضي الله عنه أنه رأى عثمان دعا بوضوء. So Humran, who was the slave of Uthman ibn Affan, is describing the wudu of Uthman ibn Affan. Okay, the third Khalifa of the Muslims and the third greatest companion after Abu Bakr and Umar. He says, I saw Uthman making wudu فأفرغ على يديه من إنائه فغسلهما 3 مرات. He first washed his hands 3 times. ثم أدخل يمينه في الوضوء. Then he put his hand into the container. What's the difference between wudu and wudu?
The wudu is the water you use. Wudu is the action.
Is the action. Good. We touched upon this before when we spoke about which hadith? Who remembers? Got good memory if you remember, huh? Good. Sahur and suhoor. Wudu or tahur, sometimes called tahur, is used. It's a description of the water itself. The wudu with a fettah. Wudu. And with a dhamma, wudu, which is what most of us use. That's the description itself, the actions of wudu. So he says, he da'a bi wudu. He requested some wudu, some water. Then he says, he placed his hands into the wudu, again, into the water. ثم تمضمض واستنشق واستنثر. Then he rinsed his mouth and nose. Istinshaq means to enter water into the nose. And istinthar means to remove the water from the nose after you've put it in. So it's not about putting water into the nose and that's it. It's putting water into the nose and removing it. The purpose is to rinse the nose. ثم غسل وجهه 3. Then he washed his face 3 times. ويديه إلى المرفقين 3. And his hands up until his elbows 3 times. ثم مسح برأسه. Then he wiped his head. ثم غسل كلتا رجليه 3. Then he washed both his feet 3 times. ثم قال رأيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يتوضأ نحو وضوء هذا. Said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ making wudu like this. Then he said, ﷺ, من توضأ نحو وضوء هذا, whoever makes wudu like this, ثم صلى ركعتين, and then prays 2 rak'ahs, لا يحدث فيهما نفسه, without being distracted by any worldly matter. Okay, without being distracted by any worldly matter. غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ. All their past sins will be forgiven. And we mentioned in Jawami' al-Akhbar, I think, the hadith of Sahih Muslim, of wudu being what? A means of? Forgiveness of sins, isn't it? And the narration goes that every time someone washes their face, their sins that they committed with their face are washed away with them. So wudu itself washes sins. Walking to the masjid washes away sins. Praying nafilah washes away sins. Praying fard washes away sins. And so really the opportunities to cleanse ourselves from sin are constant. And that's a reflection of our need as well, to constantly cleanse ourselves from sins. Particularly minor sins that continuously happen. Now, the washing of, we alluded to this last week. What were the things mentioned in the Quran describing wudu? Which things are mentioned in the Quran describing wudu? What about the face? Washing the face and washing the hands. More? Washing the hands up to the elbow, yeah? وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. Hands, notice, up to the elbows, as opposed to just the arm, from the wrist up to the elbow. And then وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. The ba is also used in this hadith. ثُمَّ مَسَحَ بِرَأْسِهِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. That ba caused difference of opinion amongst ulama on whether it means part of the head or the whole head. بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. Is this ba intended to mean a part of, لِلتَّبْعِيض as they say, or لِلْمُلَاسَقَةِ as in along with your head? Along with your head. Now the consistent sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is to wipe the whole head. Is that also the bare minimum? According to Malik and Ahmad, it's the bare minimum. You have to wipe the whole head. And according to Abu Hanifa and al-Shafi'i, and it's the view of Sufyan al-Thawri and al-Awza'i as well, it's enough to wipe part of the head. And like I said, the sunnah is to wash the whole head, and that's what should be done as a general rule. And we won't go into more, reasons for disagreement than that. And finally, the Quran mentions washing the feet. The washing of the hands at the beginning of wudu, is that wajib or is it recommended? It's recommended. Okay, the washing the hands 3 times in the beginning is recommended. It's not compulsory. The washing of the hands that's compulsory is the washing of the hands that comes after the face. And that's why I say, after the face, you wash the hands again, up to the elbow. And that's what the ayah says, وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, up to the elbow. So if a person doesn't wash their hands 3 times in the beginning, or even once, that wudu is valid. This hadith describes washing 3 times. And Abu Hurairah described the Prophet ﷺ making wudu twice for every part. And Ibn Abbas describes the Prophet ﷺ making wudu once for every part. And therefore, there is no difference of opinion that it's permissible to wash once or twice or 3 times, or to wash some limbs once and some limbs twice and others 3 times. It doesn't have to be the same number each time. Except the head, which should be wiped once only, according to most of the ulama. And it's not authentically narrated that the Prophet ﷺ ever wiped his head 3 times. Because that contradicts the purpose of wiping. Wiping is a light thing. So when it's done 3 times, that's now going, slowly stepping into washing zone. So that's the position of most of the ulama and the Sahaba.
With one hand or both hands?
With both hands. That's right. The next hadith will clarify that. And that's the hadith of Abdullah ibn Zayd. He says, عن عمرو بن يحيى المازني عن أبيه أنه قال شهدت عمرو بن أبي حسن سأل عبد الله بن زيد رضي الله عنه عن وضوء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فدعا بتور من ماء فتوضأ له وضوء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Okay, so Amr ibn Abi Hassan is asking Abdullah ibn Zayd رضي الله عنه to describe the wudu of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. Okay, notice how the deen is being transmitted, especially these kinds of things, through practice, through action. He says, فَأَكْفَى عَلَى يَدَيْهِ مِنَ التَّوْرِ فَغَسَلَ يَدَيْهِ ثَلَاثًا. Once again, he washes his hands 3 times. ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَ يَدَهُ فِي التَّوْرِ فَمَضْمَضَ وَاسْتَنْشَقَ وَاسْتَنْثَرَ ثَلَاثًا بِثَلَاثِ غَرَفَاتٍ. Then he rinsed his mouth and nose 3 times with 3 scoops. Yeah? And it's permissible to make that 6 if you want to. Once for the mouth, another for the mouth, another for the mouth, and then 3 more for the nose. Or 1 scoop for the mouth and part for the nose and then rinse, and another scoop for the mouth and the rest for the nose and then rinse, and then a 3rd one for the mouth of it. And a person can do that once, like I said. Once is permissible. He says, ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَ يَدَهُ فَغَسَلَ وَجْهَهُ. Then he washed his face. ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَ يَدَهُ فَغَسَلَ يَدَيْهِ مَرَّتَيْنِ إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. And he washed his hands up until the elbows. Twice. Yeah, notice here, twice. ثُمَّ أَدْخَلَ يَدَهُ فَمَسَحَ رَأْسَهُ. Then he wiped his head. Here, this hadith describes the nature of that wiping. He says, فَأَقْبَلَ بِهِمَا وَأَدْبَرَ مَرَّةً وَاحِدًا. فَأَقْبَلَ بِهِمَا. So he used both his hands to go from the front to the back and then he returned back to the front. And that one wipe of the head is wajib, is compulsory. And returning back is a sunnah, it's recommended. طيب. ثم غسل رجليه, then he washes his feet. He says وفي رواية بدأ بمقدم رأسه, he started at the front of his head when wiping حتى ذهب بهما إلى قفاه ثم ردهما حتى رجع إلى المكان الذي بدأ منه. وفي رواية أتانا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فأخرجنا له ماء في تور من صفر تور شبه الطست. So that's the end of that hadith. As I said, according to Shafi'i rahimahullah, wiping part of the head is permissible. Now, the author is not going to mention any ahadith that talk about wiping on the turban or the headscarf or things like that. However, that's another area which scholars have differed over. So, according to Imam Ahmad, if a man is wearing a turban or a woman is wearing a headscarf, it's permissible for them to wipe over their turban or their headscarf. Because the Prophet ﷺ made wudu and wiped over his turban. However, did he wipe over his turban because it's permissible, just like wiping on the leather socks, for example? Or did he wipe on his turban because it's enough to wipe on part of the head? So he wiped part of his head and then carried on his turban. So he did the bare minimum, which is the view of Shafi'i. So the view of Shafi'i is that there's no problem wiping on the turban because you're going to wipe part of the head anyway. So long as you do, that's enough. Okay, whereas according to Ahmad, it's permissible to wipe on the turban. So in reality, there's a bit of flexibility here for women in either way. So long as they leave the house, let's say outside the house, it's hard for them to take their headscarf off. So long as they're leaving the house with their headscarf on and in wudu, it's permissible to wipe on the socks and to wipe on the headscarf if you want to take the view of Ahmad. And if someone doesn't want to do that, then they can take the view of a Shafi'i who allows wiping part of the head. So you stick part of your hand into the headscarf and wipe part of the head, and that would suffice according to Shafi'i then. But I'm only mentioning these things as exceptions to the rule. Technically, yes, technically, according to a Shafi'i, if someone didn't make madmada and istinshaq ever, their wudu is valid. Okay? Technically, if every single wudu they did this, their wudu is valid. But that's not the standard that we want to hold ourselves to. These are bare minimum things that, may be okay at times. And that's why some ulama, like Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, didn't like, what the fuqaha did in splitting actions up into fard and wajib and sunnah and, some of the madhahib even more than that, more categorizations. Obviously fuqaha did that for the sake of ease. But he didn't like that because he felt that people would end up belittling the sunnah and end up focusing on the bare minimum. So, as I said, the reason I mentioned that is that Allahu A'lam. طيب, any comments on wudu before we move on? Yeah.
In that order?
Sorry?
Does it need to be in this order? Begin with hands?
Yes, it should be in that order. There's no harm in moving the order in terms of left and right. Let's say someone washes their left arm, then the right, that's okay. It's also okay to wash the face and then rinse the mouth and nose, because it's all part of the face. But not to wash the arms and then the face. And we remember last week, the Quran specifically mentions these things in order, even though it would have been easier probably to say فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ, wash your faces and arms and feet. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, and wipe your heads. As opposed to confusing us with, it's not really confusion, but as opposed to doing the what may be seen as the more difficult approach, and that is to say wash the face and wash the arms and wipe the head and wash the feet. So the fact that order is mentioned specifically like that implies that it has to be like that. Also, the Prophet ﷺ never made wudu without that order. So, that's the view that we go by, Wallahu A'lam, even though there's some debate, yeah.
Wiping of the socks. Is it permissible?
Yes, it's permissible, and we'll come to, inshallah, the conditions that relate to that. Yeah.
Shaykh, some people they sort of do their ears and their neck as well. Is that from hadith or?
Wiping the ears is authentically narrated from the Prophet ﷺ as along with the head. Okay, wiping the ears after wiping the head. However, there is no authentic hadith on wiping the neck, and that's why the vast majority of ulama don't recommend that.
If you wipe without ears, no problem.
If you don't wipe the ears, then most of the ulama consider that to be permissible, the wudu valid, because they don't believe wiping the ears to be fard. However, Imam Ahmad, just as he said about washing the mouth and nose, it's part of the face, he said wiping the ears are part of the head, so you have to wipe the ears with the head. So that's the view of Imam Ahmad, but the other fuqaha have no problem with not wiping the ears. Yeah.
Can you do more than 3 times?
No. And we're going to come to that in the next hadith. Yeah.
If I wipe over my head, can I do the wipe straight over my socks without going in the wudu? After wiping? Can I go straight to the
No, they should be separate. Yeah, good. A good question. Every limb should be treated separately. Now, because the ears and the head are considered one, there's no harm in wiping the head and then continuing on to the ears. But because the head and the feet are two separate limbs, new water should be used for each one. What else was it? Yeah. Who else had something? Yeah.
Just regarding the wiping of the socks, so can you wipe the socks regardless of location? If I'm at home, for example, I've got my socks and I swipe over at home as well.
In summary, the Prophet ﷺ, and I think the hadith is going to come later on anyway, so maybe we'll delay the details for there. He's going to mention the hadith later on. But generally speaking, wiping on the socks is permissible at all places and all times if the conditions are fulfilled. And those conditions we'll come to later. Yeah.
So the hadith, wiping over the turban, what caused other ulama, such as not to, the other ulama such as Malik, don't find it permissible to wipe over the turban?
He doesn't consider it to be, he doesn't consider it to be a strongly established sunnah. Yeah. And the hadith on wiping the turban, even though they're narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, scholars of hadith have had some back and forths on their strength, and it wasn't a consistent practice, so it seems like Malik didn't like it because of that. Malik used to like that the consistent sunnah is followed, not exceptions to the rule he would often rule out, even if technically from a hadith perspective a hadith is sound, he wouldn't be quick to accept, because he considered that what we were taught is a consistent sunnah. Narrations that are an exception to the rule may have reasons to them. Exceptions, this, that, whatever. So you notice that Malik is quite strict on things like that. Wallahu a'lam, yeah.
What does it mean to reject a hadith which is considered sound?
It's not a case of rejecting a hadith because he doesn't like it. It's a case of, I have more authentic hadith and verses of the Quran establishing what I should do. Yeah? If an exceptional case comes along in which the Prophet ﷺ did something against the norm, that to him does not make it a norm. It doesn't make it a sunnah. And the word sunnah itself refers to the consistent way. وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You won't find the sunnah of Allah changing. So the idea of a sunnah is that it's something that is consistently practiced. Al-Bazdawi rahimahullah in his usul says, As-sunnatu hiya at-tariqatu al-maslukatu fi ad-din. The sunnah is that consistently trodden path of the religion. Consistent, way. So that's why some ulama had a higher threshold on accepting narrations that went against the standard or against the norm, unless they were of a high level of authenticity, in which case yes.
So it's not a two-part question. So say if someone has a bandage or a cast on a part of the wudu that is considered wajib, like the feet or the arms. First of all, would wudu be wajib upon them? And if so, what would they do about the cast?
That also, normally the fuqaha mention, along with the section on wiping on the socks, because it all relates to wiping on some kind of cover. And so, because wiping on the turban, headscarf, socks, a bandage and stuff come under the same heading, we'll discuss some of those details when the author mentions them. But the general rule is that wudu is still required, as a rule. And then we'll look at exceptional kinds of cases. Last question.
Do you have to wash your hands every time you move from a limb?
No.
So from the mouth to the nose, you have to start washing your hands before you go to the feet, etc.
No need for that at all. No need for that. Final hadith. The author rahimahullah ta'ala says عن نعيم المجمر عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال إن أمتي يدعون يوم القيامة غرا محجلين من آثار الوضوء. My ummah will be called on the day of judgment غرا محجلين. These are like descriptions of horses, the whiteness that a horse has, sometimes on the forehead and so on, other parts of the body. That's what that description is about. So it's almost like the believers on the day of judgment will have a symbol of brightness. It doesn't mean it's actually like a white patch the way horses have it, but will have a brightness to their faces and a brightness to them as a result of wudu. And some of the Sahaba asked the Prophet ﷺ, how will you recognize your followers, your people on the day of judgment, your ummah? He said through the wudu, through the sign of wudu. He says, فَمَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يُطِيلَ غُرَّتَهُ فَلْيَفْعَلْ. So whoever is able to extend their brightness should do so. Who has the tahqiq of Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Qasim? Who's reading from this copy? No one? In this copy, he mentioned the first part, my ummah is called forth on the day of judgment with brightness because of the wudu. Full stop. He mentioned that in bright red because the hadith, the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions them in red. Then in black he continues, فَمَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمْ. Whoever is able to extend their brightness should do so. Jameel. And that implies what? The muhaqqiq, the publisher of the book, believes what? Exactly, he believes that the part in red is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. And the rest is the statement of who? Abu Hurairah. And the reason he believes that is because he likely disagrees with the practice of Abu Hurairah that comes in the rest of the hadith. Because Nu'aym al-Mujmir says, I saw Abu Hurairah making wudu. فَغَسَلَ وَجْهَهُ. He washed his face. وَيَدَيْهِ حَتَّى كَادَ يَبْلُغُ الْمَنْكِبَيْنِ. He washed his arms till he almost reached his elbows. Till he almost reached his shoulders. So he went beyond the elbow. He says, ثُمَّ غَسَلَ رِجْلَيْهِ حَتَّى رَفَعَ إِلَى السَّاقَيْنِ. And he washed his feet up to the ankles and above onto his shins. He says, ثُمَّ قَالَ. Then he said, after watching him make wudu like that, he says, سَمِعْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم يقول إِنَّ أُمَّتِي يُدْعَوْنَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ غُرًّا مُحَجَّلِينَ مِنْ أَثَرِ الْوُضُوءِ فَمَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يُطِيلَ غُرَّتَهُ فَلْيَفْعَلْ. He says, وفي لفظ لمسلم سمعت خليلي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول تبلغ الحلية من المؤمن حيث يبلغ الوضوء. In the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, it's narrated that Nu'aym says, I don't know whether the statement of the Prophet ﷺ is that whole thing or whether the last part is Abu Hurairah's statement. And that's what led some ulama to saying this practice of Abu Hurairah was his understanding, his interpretation. It wasn't one that most of the Sahaba agreed with. In fact, it's narrated that Abu Hurairah made this kind of wudu once, and once somebody watched him make wudu. So he said, what kind of wudu is this? He said, you're here watching? He said, if I knew you were here, I wouldn't have done that. So it's almost like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu knew this wasn't the sunnah, but he understood this hadith to mean perhaps if he extends his washing, then that will be a form of reward in the akhirah based on this hadith. And like I said, most of the Sahaba didn't really agree with him on that. Though some ulama took with the view of Abu Hurairah and said it's permissible to extend in that way. And the reason many ulama disagreed with Abu Hurairah on this is because the Prophet ﷺ says, as narrated by Abu Dawood in his Sunan, and An-Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah, and Ahmad in his Musnad, from Amr ibn Shu'ayb and Abihi an Jaddih, the Prophet ﷺ said, this is the wudu, and he washed 3 times. فَمَنْ زَادَ فَقَدْ تَعَدَّى وَظَلَمَ. Whoever goes beyond this has transgressed and oppressed. And that answers your question. You heard the question about more than 3? Okay. So that answers that question. The washing more than 3 times is disliked and against the sunnah. Even if someone is paranoid about whether they washed properly or they didn't wash properly, they cannot go beyond 3 times, because that's transgression. And the Sharia is not about giving into the wasawis of shaitan. The Sharia is against giving into the games of shaitan. Whether that relates to salah or wudu, or just do things. Do things as they are, basically, in a simple way. It doesn't require exaggeration, it doesn't require too much focus, too much, it's against the Sharia to have that kind of takalluf. قُلْ مَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ وَمَا أَنَا مِنْ مُتَكَلِّفِينَ, as the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah says this in the Quran. I don't request any payment from you, nor am I from those who exaggerate, mutakallifin. The deen's easy. Takbiratul ihram is easy. Raising the hands up to the shoulder level. Placing the right hand over the left is easy. Reading al-Fatiha is easy. Saying Allahu Akbar is easy. And someone said to Ibn Qudama rahimahullah, who has a book called Dhammul Waswasa, or Dhammul Muwaswisin even. He said, somebody came to me and said, every time I pray, I'm not sure whether I say Allahu Akbar correctly. He said, what? He said, every time I pray, I'm not sure whether I say Allahu Akbar correctly. He said, just say it like that. The way you said it to me now, just say it like that. It doesn't require more than that. And the same applies to wudu. Wash the hands like you'd watch anyone washing their hands normally, without pinpointing, and the whole deen should be practiced like that. As for excessive focus, are my hands above shoulder levels? What's that? It's against the deen. Are they exactly here? Have I placed them exactly here? And tight and tense, and everyone's tense on the row next to you. The whole thing, everything is supposed to be, relaxed and easy and with flexibility. So, actually giving in to the waswas of shaitan, that's when you are more likely to be sinful than accidentally missing something, or this is more sinful than that. Wallahu a'lam. So that was the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and it shows the great reward in the dunya and akhirah of perfecting wudu, but without exaggeration, of course. And like I said, 3 is the limit. 3 washes is the limit for all the limbs. Wallahu a'lam. طيب, what's the time? What time's Isha? 10 or 10:15? 10:15. Who has something? Yeah.
The second memorization. Maybe leave before this one. You intentionally skip it.
Which one? No, I didn't. Jazakallah khair for pointing it out. That wasn't intentional. Let's go back to that then. Hadith of Aisha, hadith number 9. He says عن عائشة رضي الله عنها أنها قالت كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يعجبه التيمم في تنعله وترجله وطهوره وفي شأنه كله. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم used to like using his right in several things. تنعله being wearing his shoes. وترجله being combing his hair, the right side, then the left. وطهوره being his purification, wudu, ghusl, and so on. وفي شأنه كله, and all his affairs. He used to prefer using the right. Did the Prophet ﷺ ever teach us to not use the right on some things? Like what? Huh? What about the toilet? Okay, good. When cleansing oneself, okay, I want precision in fiqh, that's why I don't want vague answers like that. When making istinja, okay, he said, وَلَا يَتَمَسَّحْ مِنَ الْخَلَاءِ بِيَمِينِهِ. Don't wipe or make istinja using the right hand. And he said, لَا يُمْسِكَنَّ أَحَدُكُمْ ذَكَرَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ. And none should hold their privates with their right. Also, بِيَمِينِهِ. And he also said, and this hadith is also narrated in the Sahih, if one of you wears their clothes or their shoes, they should wear their right first, then the left. And if they take them off, they should take the left off first, then the right. And there are several things that are authentically narrated. Ulama took from that a general principle, and that is that things that are done that are pleasant and pure and entering places of purity and so on are done using the right, beginning with the right. And the opposite is done using the left. And that's why eating should be done with the right hand. Whereas istinja with the left hand, and so on. So from that, that principle is taken. Entering the masjid with the right foot first, leaving the masjid with the left foot, entering the bathroom with the left foot, leaving it with the right foot. And these things are taken from that principle. And anything which involves cleansing impurity or that type of thing should be done with the left. Okay? So, for example, if somebody let's say somebody wants to sneeze into their hand, then do so into the left. Do so into the left, and so on. Because the right hand is the one that's going to be used for giving and taking and shaking hands and so on. Once I was عليكم السلام.
ممكن يمسح والراس والأذن والرجلين
بمسحة واحدة أو بماء واحد. لا، يمسح الرأس والأذنين بمسحة واحد. يمسح الرأس والأذنين بماء واحد. The head and the ears with one kind of water. لأن الأذنان من الرأس. أما الرجلين فلا، يجدد الماء ثم يمسح الرجلين. هذا إذا كان عليه خفين طبعا أو جوارب. Once I gave a dars at the Amana, and I stood up, so people stood up and they give me salam, shake my hands and stuff. So one brother sneezed loudly into his hands. Okay, right into his hands. So I said, if this brother tries to shake my hand, I'm going to pat him on the shoulder. I think he was smart enough to not try to shake my hand after that. So anyway, all of these kinds of things are done using the left, whereas some of the things mentioned in this hadith are done using the right. That's out of recommendation. It's not haram. Okay, most of these things are not prohibited, but out of recommendation, adab. And really, this just shows that the Sunnah teaches us to be conscious about our behavior. It may seem like small things. You guys even have, do things with specific hand, this with the right hand and that with the left hand. It just shows consciousness in behavior, consciousness in action, and a good adab, good taste as well. Okay, as opposed to sneezing into left hand and cleansing with the left hand, istinja with the left hand, and shaking with the left hand as well, and so on. So that's where this sunnah comes from. Yeah.
I believe I've heard a hadith about eating with the left hand, that shaitan eats if you eat with the left hand.
Authentic hadith. That's right. Eat with your right hand. Don't eat with your left hand because the shaitan eats with his left hand. And these kinds of hadith we accept as they are, without going into details, because they're from the matters of the unseen. He says, "An Anas ibn Malik." Let's have a look. Maybe we'll take this hadith and the next one as the last hadith, inshallah, because they're short hadith and don't require much commentary. عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا دخل الخلاء قال اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الخبث والخبائث. Whenever he used to enter the place to relieve himself, he would say اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الخبث والخبائث. The author says الخبث بضم الخاء والباء جمع خبيث. He says it's a plural of that which is filthy or impure. والخبائث جمع خبيثة استعاذ من ذكران الشياطين وإناثهم. So this is one opinion. The author says al-khubthi wal-khaba'ith is a reference to the shayateen, male and female. The shayateen, male and female. Khubuth, plural of khabith, okay, male shayateen, and khaba'ith being the plural of khabitha, the female shayateen. That's one tafsir. And another tafsir considers that it's a reference to all kinds of harmful or impure things. Khubth wal khaba'ith. Now, he used to say this bearing in mind that there were no bathrooms in that time or specifically designated places or rooms to relieve oneself, but people would simply go far away into the open, away from people, and relieve themselves there. And so this kind of dhikr would be said just before wanting to relieve oneself. And that's why there is no harm in making this kind of dhikr or saying Bismillah inside the bathrooms of today, especially public bathrooms. Because public bathrooms in restaurants or airports or things like that, normally we'll come back to the home bathrooms in a second, normally we'll have an open section where you have sinks, right? And a dryer and so on, and then you have the cubicles inside, further in. So there's no need to make that dhikr until one is about to enter into those cubicles. Don't have to say it as soon as you enter. And if someone goes into the open section in the middle, they can say Bismillah, they can speak, they can make dhikr, or say whatever they want, there's no harm. In fact, possibly even the bathrooms that we have at home, because they are used for several things, it's also okay to say Bismillah when in the sink area or in the bathtub or the shower or something like that. And if a person wants to relieve themselves, then just before they go into that section, they can say Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith. And there's no harm in saying it before you step into the toilet altogether. Flexible issue. It's a dhikr. There's no harm in either case. He says, عن أبي أيوب الأنصاري رضي الله عنه, and this is the final hadith, أنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. This hadith and the next hadith, the final hadith, because they're connected. He says, إذا أتيتم الغائط فلا تستقبلوا القبلة بغائط ولا بول ولا تستدبروها. If you come to relieve yourself, then don't face the qibla, nor put your back to the qibla. ولكن شرقوا أو غربوا. Face east or west. Okay. He's obviously addressing the people who are where? In Medina, yeah? In Medina. So facing east and west for them. If east is the Kaaba, then obviously it doesn't apply. Yeah? It would be away from the Kaaba. قال أبو أيوب. And this is an example of some difference of opinion between Sahaba. فقدمنا الشام. We went to Sham فوجدنا مراحيض قد بنيت نحو الكعبة. we found toilets built in Sham facing the Kaaba. In the time of the Sahaba, Aisha says this, and this hadith shows that too. This was a new thing. They had separate buildings for relieving oneself, toilets. Okay? And Aisha says we didn't have that, in the earlier days. That's something that was introduced later on. He says, فَنَنْحَرِفُ عَنْهَا وَنَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهِ. So we would use these toilets, but we would face slightly away and say, astaghfirullah, seek forgiveness for not being able to fulfill this sunnah, to its fullest. طيب. However, Abdullah ibn Umar, in the following hadith, seems to have a slightly different understanding of this issue. And he says, رَقِيتُ يَوْمًا عَلَى بَيْتِ حَفْصَةٍ. I once climbed up in Hafsa's house to get something or to do something, whatever. Not intentionally. He says, فَرَأَيْتُ النَّبِيَّ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم يَقْضِي حَاجَتَهُ مُسْتَقْبِلَ الشَّامِ مُسْتَدْبِرَ الْكَعْبَةِ. I saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam relieving himself facing Sham, facing Bayt al-Maqdis, and with his back to the Kaaba. So Abdullah ibn Umar understood, I'm not just saying it from this narration, but he explicitly says this elsewhere. Abdullah ibn Umar understood that facing the Qibla is only prohibited if you're relieving yourself out in the open. If you're behind closed doors or within a building, he didn't have a problem with that. And that obviously makes life easy for us because it saves us having to, see whether this is facing the Qibla or not, and then moving left and right and so on. But obviously Abu Ayyub, in the previous hadith, even though he was within a building, still felt that he should be facing away from the Qibla. So maybe he took a more cautious opinion on that issue. The view of Abdullah ibn Umar is the view of al-Shafi'i and Ahmad. And Malik, in fact, on this issue. And I'm not sure about the position of the Hanafis, but this is the position of most of the ulama. Allah ta'ala a'lam wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Any final comments or... Yeah.
When somebody is doing wuzu, during, he passed the wind or he wants to go to a week for some reasons, does he have to start again?
They have to start again, yes. They have to start again. And, breaking wudu, whether that happens after a person's made wudu or during their wudu, requires them to start again from the beginning. Otherwise, it's an incomplete wudu. Yeah, that means only part of the wudu was done in a state of complete purity. As opposed to all of it.
And what about water? Has to use new water?
For what?
New water
No.
You can continue.
And you can continue using the same water if they're using a vessel container. They don't have to change it or anything like that. Yeah.
Let's say a person is doing the wudu and as they're about to wash their feet, they realize they didn't wash their arm properly.
Yeah.
So would that mean that they have to go back a couple of steps, or do they have to start from the beginning?
They go back a few steps. They wash their arms properly, or the part that they didn't wash properly, then wipe their head, and then wash their feet. They don't need to start from the beginning because they've maintained the order. Yeah. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah.
Just go back to wudu as well. Is there anything recommended we should say or make an intention before we do wudu?
Saying Bismillah is recommended before making wudu, and I don't know whether the author mentions it later on or not, but Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu described that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever makes wudu and then says أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله فتحت له أبواب الجنة الثمانية. Allah opens up the 8 gates of Jannah, يدخل من أيها شاء. allowing them to enter from whichever one they want. So that's recommended to say after wudu. And in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad and the Tirmidhi and other books as well, Aisha radiallahu anha says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to say when leaving the toilet, غفرانك. Used to say when leaving the toilet, غفرانك. And that's the most authentic hadith that we have on that particular topic. It's not in the Bukhari and Muslim, which is why the author didn't mention it. Okay, but it's in the Musnad of Ahmad and Tirmidhi and others. Yeah.
I was sitting in others and it was mentioned that if in between the wudu, if you're doing something else, then you need to repeat the whole wudu again. So suppose I'm in the middle of the wudu, I've washed my face,
Yeah.
I have to open the door now.
Yeah.
So if I open the door again and then come back, then I have to repeat the entire thing. I can't.
Fuqaha call this issue muwala, which means to do things one after the other. So long as wudu is done together, it's valid. Meaning, if the break in between is short, it doesn't harm it. If it's a long break, then yeah, it should be repeated from the beginning. So going downstairs, okay, to open the door and then back is a short break. It's not long. Okay. But being on the phone for 20 minutes and then afterwards going back, that's a long break.
Can you talk?
And there's no specific time to dictate what's long and short. But a person, uses their sense to distinguish between that. And there's no harm in talking whilst making wudu. It doesn't impact it at all. Yeah.
Can you, if you wash one foot, can you then wear a sock before you move on to the next one?
You
You're
can.
outside, it's cold.
You can if you want to. However, you probably mean, are you allowed to wipe on those socks later?
Yes.
If you do it later on, you're going to take off your socks. Okay. Later on, you're going to take off your socks and wash your feet properly. That's fine. Yeah, there's no harm in doing that. But if you plan to wipe on the socks, then it's better to first finish your wudu completely and then do that. And the reason we'll mention next lesson, inshallah, when the author talks about Hadith al-Mughira bin Shu'bah. Yeah.
Say someone's made complete wudu and put their socks on, and they've taken their socks off, but they haven't
Lost their wudu.
He has lost the wudu, and he puts his socks back on.
That's fine.
And he continues to wipe on the socks.
That's fine. So long as they put the one in a state of purity. Yeah.
Two questions. When you're wiping the socks, can you wipe one at a time or both at a
Tayyib, how come you guys are all asking about socks? Today's questions and next week's questions all to Tayyib. Go on.
So, can you wipe one at a time or both at the same time?
Both are permissible. Don't ask these questions again next week though.
And the other question, on the matters of right hand doing things with your right. For example, if you're wearing rings or watches, do you wear it on your right or do you use your right hand to put it on your left?
Sorry? You want to wearing a ring?
Yeah, if you're wearing a ring, do you put it on your right hand?
It doesn't really matter. Because the hadith on it are so varied, and the Sahaba did different things. Some wore it on their right, some on their left. It's quite a flexible thing. Wearing it on the right or left, yeah.
Does touching something najis invalidate your wudu?
No. Touching anything impure doesn't break the wudu. There is nothing that you touch that will break the wudu. Except two possible things. Both are pure. According to some ulama, they break the wudu, and again we'll delay that for when the author talks about it. Yeah. What was it you? Yeah.
Sorry, hopefully last sock question.
Sure.
Is the length of the sock defined? Especially if it is below the ankle.
It has to cover the foot.
It has to cover. The foot is defined up to the ankle.
Yes. And we'll, again, justify or discuss that in detail next week, inshallah. Yeah.
And should the feet be washed with leather?
Sorry?
Should the feet only be washed with leather?
No harm. No harm. Washing the feet can be with both the right and the left. See, there are some adab, by the way, some etiquettes that are explicitly mentioned in the Sunnah. And there are some etiquettes that are maybe taken from general understandings of the deen. And we should distinguish between the two. Because some things that people consider to be respectful or disrespectful, there might not be a need to consider them respectful or disrespectful. Some people may view it as disrespectful, for instance, to turn their back to the Qibla, okay? Or even to face their feet towards the Qibla when sitting down or things like that. But there's no need to consider it like that, because not everything that sounds respectful should be a requirement on people or something like that. Especially if, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't really teach that kind of adab. And we may end up falling into considering things that the Sahaba did to be disrespectful. Yeah, so that's a line to sometimes draw as well. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier with the dog's saliva, you knew a revert and you recommended they take the Maliki position.
In his particular case, yeah.
Yeah, in his particular case. That kind of principle of choosing a position based on ease, is that recommended, or what's the kind of thoughts behind it?
It's not a general rule, but I would say on this issue the general principle is where there is no clear evidence on an issue, where there's no clear evidence on an issue, a clear requirement from the Sharia, then giving flexibility at times of hardship is recommended. So, I wouldn't give an easy opinion if I felt that easy opinion is clearly contradicting a prophetic command. So in that case, it's a problem. If, however, there's no clear evidence for prohibiting something, but we're just doing things out of caution or preference, or in that case, there's some freedom to pick, to sort of choose appropriate positions. And that's the sort of methodology our Shaykh take on this as well.
Shaykh, you just said the socks have to cover the ankles.
Yeah.
Is this like ijtihad from ulama, or we have a clear dalil from the hadith that it should be covered?
We don't have a text in the Sunnah which says it's not permissible to wipe on socks below the ankles. However, and I'll expand more on this next week, wiping on the socks is an exception to the rule, isn't it? Meaning, washing the feet is the command of Allah, and that's the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Wiping on the socks is an exception to the rule, and therefore most ulama believe the exception to the rule should be done in the same way the Prophet ﷺ used the exception, not with more leniency. Yeah, not with more leniency. So that's the idea behind it. And the khuffayn the Prophet ﷺ wore covered his whole foot and tended to be somewhat thick. They don't have to be very thick, or as some fuqaha say, you have to be able to walk in them for days and on the mountains and this and that, and they don't rip. It doesn't have to be like that. Okay, the wooden socks these are going to be, or even harder than that. So they don't have to reach that kind of level, but they also should have some thickness to them, relative, and cover the whole foot, so that we are wiping on the same kind of sock, or at least one that resembles what the Prophet ﷺ had done. And also the issue of hardship of removal comes into it as well. So that's the position of the vast majority of ulama based on this principle. Yeah, absolutely. And when I say jumhur, I mean the ijma' of the former Zahed.
Is it possible that someone say, I have just a sock below the ankles and I wipe? Is this possible? Is there no alim who said this?
I wouldn't be surprised if some ulama said it. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some ulama who said that. But like I said, on matters of ibadah, caution is good. Caution is good, especially if the Prophet ﷺ also didn't give explicit concession to wipe on socks of that nature. So that's why, that's Allah. Anything especially relating to socks and so on, we will delay to next week. And in future, we need to stick to questions relating to the ahadith. Otherwise, we'll do all of Umdat al-Ahkam, in one does. Yeah. Final question here, and then that's it. Yeah.
What's the ruling for someone who has continuous bleeding, like from their gums or the nose? If they make wudu, would they have to wait for it to completely stop, which could take like hours or something? Would it still be valid? How would it work?